All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Paul for being an amazing host. Thank you to John, who had to run, who graced us with his presence and a very, very powerful few songs, and I think some powerful words as well that are important to keep in mind. So I'm here to continue that conversation and open the door to really honest and candid musings on mental health, mental illness, and what we go through every day that we sometimes don't give words to. About 11 years ago, I began volunteering on a crisis helpline. I was hoping to help provide a service that I wish I knew existed when I was in a very dark place. What I didn't know at that time is that my darkest place hadn't actually happened yet. And so I began volunteering. I took pride in the fact that I could use what I'd been through to support others, to connect with them better, and to understand what they were going through. And eventually, my symptoms caught up to me, and that dark place came back deeper and darker than before. I found myself going through a suicide attempt through which I put myself in a coma for almost a week. And 3 weeks later, after I was sent home from the ICU and the psych ward, I did it again. And that is because mental health recovery is not linear. We don't get diagnosed, get treatment, get better, and then life moves on. It's an ongoing process. It's a journey, a daily battle. It's something that we have to work at. And I didn't know that yet. And so that second suicide attempt, after the one that put me in the coma, I was found in the woods by 2 police officers. One of them lifted up the sleeves of my sweater and kicked away the knife that I'd had in my hands. He looked at my arms that badly needed stitches, and he said, "Wow, this kid tried to do it right. She must be in so much pain." And through my semi-conscious understanding of what was going on, I thought, finally, somebody can see the pain that I'm in. Somebody can see that it's not bearable, it's not livable, and maybe I will get the help that I need. The officer that was his partner helped carry me onto the stretcher that the ambulance had brought. And when I started shaking because of the pills that I'd taken, that I'd thrown up, which led me to pulling out the knife, he looked at me and he said, "Show's over, kid." And in that moment, I felt like I wasn't even a human. I felt like the dirt under his shoe. I felt like there was absolutely no understanding of what somebody might be going through who would go to that length to try not to exist anymore. And so they took me to the hospital. I was taken into the ER. And I was rolled into a room that wasn't actually a room, it was just surrounded by curtains. And an ER physician came out and said that he was here to take care of me. At that point, that one police officer was still making remarks. And that's when I decided to threaten to kick him in the face. And that may not have been the best choice, but that is how I was feeling in that moment. I couldn't believe that that kind of verbal violence shouldn't be responded to with physical violence, and that I had to protect myself. And the ER physician looked at the officer, then looked at me, and looked back at the officer and said, "Dude, I believe her. I think you should leave right now." And so the officer stepped away, and I never saw him again, and I was now left alone with the ER physician, who looked at me and said, "I would like to unstrap you from this stretcher, from this hospital bed. I need to make sure that I'm not receiving a kick in the face." And I looked at him and I said, "I am not an animal. I am a person in pain. If you can treat me with human dignity, if you can treat me with the care that you would give someone with a broken arm rather than a broken mind, then yes, you can unstrap me, and there's nothing unsafe about that. And so he undid the restraints, and he let me sit up, and he sat down in front of me, and he looked at me, and he said, I will be honest with you. I'm an MD. I'm a medical doctor. I've been through medical school. Yes, we get a psych rotation, but it isn't enough, and most people don't take it seriously. So what I can do for you right now is tell you that I don't know enough to do for you what you need. But if you tell me what would be helpful in this moment, I will do my very best to provide that for you. And in that moment, it felt like a weight had dropped off my shoulders. I felt like a curtain had fallen down in front of me, like I could finally be seen and heard, and something might change. And that's when I trusted him. And that is that piece that mental health workers, clinicians, professionals, nurses, doctors need to understand. That building that trust and that rapport is the very first step to being able to address mental health issues. And so while he stitched me up, we talked about everything and anything. And I wish I could remember his name so I could send him a thank you, because it made such an impact on me to know that somebody was finally seeing me as a person, not as my illness. And that is something that I've had to do for myself, becoming a whole entire person rather than a label, a diagnosis. When I was diagnosed, borderline personality disorder, bipolar 2 disorder, I feared that these labels would be negative, that these diagnoses would put a stamp on me that would create shame, that would bring about judgment, and that would bring self-judgment as well. All of that stigma that comes with mental health. But the way that I've had to learn to frame it is to decide that what those labels mean is that somebody came up with them because other people feel that as well. If you were the first person in the entire world to break your arm, maybe there wouldn't even be a name for that bone yet. But everybody breaks an arm. Everybody climbs a tree as a kid, falls off their bike, what have you. It's a very common injury, and when you break your arm, you don't feel shame. In fact, people will sign your cast. People will ask you how it happened. Maybe you have a really cool story about a dirt bike, something that keeps people interested. But when something breaks on the inside, people are afraid to address it. Giving it a name, however, means that other people feel that way too. It's something that's treatable. There are ways to look at it, address it, manage it, mitigate it, because it's not your fault. And I very, very often say that mental illness is not your fault. It is, however, your responsibility. For those of us who live with symptoms of mental illness or any mental health concern, it is our responsibility to manage that in the best way that works for us, and that's different for everyone. But the very first step of doing that is asking for the help that we need. No one can read our minds. No one can help us unless we ask, and it takes such a tremendous amount of strength to ask for help. I know, in our society, asking for help can be seen as weakness. Walk it off. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, rub some dirt in it, what have you. We see asking for help as a weakness, but it takes so much strength to look within ourselves and say, I cannot do this alone. And that is a lesson over my 11 plus years of recovery that I have learned the hard way. And it's something that I'm extremely, extremely proud of myself for learning. I remember one time I wasn't feeling safe. Suicidal thoughts for me are chronic. They will always come up. I will always have to fight them. And I will always have to learn that I am stronger than they are. But sometimes I need extra help. And suicidal thoughts came up. I thought, I am not safe. And I told my husband, we're going to the hospital. And when I told him this, he didn't say, well, the hospital's 50 minutes away. Well, we had plans tonight. Well, what are we going to do with the dog? Well, can't you just use your skills and your tools and feel better? The first thing he said to me was, I'm proud of you. And that hit me hard, because it is really hard for me to be proud of myself, and hearing it from someone that I respect just makes the message all that more powerful. And so we went to the ER, and I ended up in a room waiting for the crisis nurse. And when the crisis nurse came in, we looked at each other and we realized that we knew each other. She had been my nurse when I was on the inpatient unit all those years ago. She was now a crisis nurse for outpatient for the ER. She looked at me and she said, I'm looking at your notes and you're here because of suicidal thoughts. Is that correct? I looked at her and I hesitated and I said, yeah. And she looked at me, and the first thing she said was what I had just heard an hour before. I am proud of you. Let me tell you, the waterworks just started flowing. I could not believe that two people in the same span of 2 hours would be proud of me for doing something that I was shaming myself for. I kept telling myself, if you have the willpower to drive to the hospital, don't you have the willpower to just not kill yourself? You're wasting resources, you're wasting time, you're feeling down on yourself when all you need to do is be stronger. But that strength that I demonstrated it through asking for help. And that is so important to remember. Asking for help is not easy. And everyone needs help once in a while. I know there's probably a ton of you in the audience, when you do groceries and there's 12 bags, you're like, I'm going to do one trip, and that's it. And your fingers are about to fall off, and you tell yourself, no way I'm doing a second trip. Even with silly things, it's difficult to ask for help. We want to be all-containing, self-sufficient, independent. But that's not why humans exist. We exist to live in community. And I love everything that John shared, because I think that is a huge part of it. Being that I advocate for peer experience and peer knowledge within the mental health field, that very much connects to Indigenous practices. And it very much connects to that worldview of community, of connection, and of knowledge passed down through people who have been through it. And these are things that I think we need to lean into a little bit more. And that's why I share what I've been through. Not for people to feel sorry for me, but to give a positive, impactful purpose to what I've been through, and to realize that I'm still here for a reason. It really is a little bit selfish. It helps me process, and it helps me give meaning to what I've experienced, so that I know I can move forward, and I know I can move forward with purpose. I've come to a point in my life where mental health is something that I talk about a lot. And I sometimes have friends who'll tell me, okay, we're going to change the subject for now. I know this is important to you, but we will come back to it. Can we just talk about Taylor Swift for a second? And that's fine. Heavy topics can't be discussed 24/7. We need breaks. It's the same with recovery. We need breaks. You cannot be 100% of the time working on your personal growth, your inner peace, your mental health. We need breaks where we do things that just bring us joy, and that's okay. But mental health has become such a big part of my life, because I believe that it is just as important as physical health. And if I don't treat it as such, I will forget that. In my family, we're all in therapy. I'm in therapy. My husband is in therapy. My husband and I together are in therapy. The dog is in therapy. And I'm not even kidding. We are working with a behavioralist for the dog. These are important things to normalize. These are important things to talk about and realize that there is no shame in that. If you go to regular checkups for your physical health, why not do the same for your mental? And not without having a sense of the fact that it's something that you're doing for yourself at the most very basic sense of what your health is. Yes, physical health is very, very important. And if you have a cold, you're clearly going to know that you're not feeling well. But if your mind isn't quite right and you're feeling anxious, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling overwhelmed, let yourself understand that that's normal, but it's not something that you have to live with. It is normal and okay that you feel that way, but it is something that deserves support as well. I grew up in a house where you don't go to the hospital or the doctor unless you're literally on death's door. It doesn't have to be that way. It should not be that way for physical health, and it doesn't have to be that way for mental health either. It's something that I really believe the more we talk about, the more we'll open conversations where people understand that they have the right and they actually deserve to ask for that help. That's really what I want people to take away from the fact that I'm so open and transparent about what I go through. The fact that there is no shame to it. And there's a poet that I really love. Her name is Olivia Gatwood. And she says that shame is not an organic feeling. It's something that we feel because we are told that we should feel it. And I believe that that's what our feelings of shame and stigma around mental health are caused by. We tell each other that we should feel that way. When in fact, if we were to be more open, understanding, and empathetic, people could talk about it more candidly. Yes, there is a time and place. If you're in an elevator and you're going 3 floors up and somebody says, "Hey, how are you today?" Might not be the right time to say, "Well, you know, my relationship is not working well and I'm extremely sad and I feel like maybe my mental health is going down the drain and I really need some support," and etc. 3 floors, probably not enough to go through that. But you can easily say, instead of "I'm fine, how are you?" "Not doing great, but I have some supports, thanks for asking." Or, "Not doing great, maybe if you have some time later, we could chat." There are ways to approach these topics without sweeping them under the rug. And I think that that's really important. It's also important to be real in the ways that we can be, in the ways that are appropriate, that are feasible for the situation that you're in. And a great example of that is you often hear people who will go up a flight of stairs and complain that they maybe have knee pain. Understandable, knee pain sucks, I get it. But then having somebody tell you that they're anxious or they're overwhelmed about something, that can be seen as a pity party and complaining for the sake of complaining. But it's a very similar situation. I remember when I gave my TEDx talk in 2019, I got off the stage and the tech girl was taking the mic off of me, and I let out a big sigh and I went, "Oh, okay, well, at least that's over." And she looks at me and she goes, "Honey, you're still mic'd." And I thought about it for a sec, red came to my cheeks, and then I thought, you know what, that was a real moment. I was just up there talking about mental health and being real. That was a real moment. Let the audience hear that. Anybody who doesn't get on stage and have a little bit of nerves has got something going on that they're not admitting. I can tell you that. So I think being open and candid in our daily goings-on and our daily activities is a big part of keeping that conversation going. Being open to being here tonight and hearing me out about what I have to say hopefully will allow you to open up more conversations and open up areas of your life where you find ways to normalize and destigmatize mental health. A big part of that is language, the way that we use language. I remember being in a lunchroom at a job that I had many, many years ago before I started this career in mental health, before I had my own business. And I sat in that break room and I overheard a woman say, "Oh yes, my husband is in the psych ward. He has bipolar. He's a total psycho." And I sat there thinking, noted. So you just told me that this is not a safe environment for me to share what I go through, what I experience, what is a part of my identity. And no, I am not bipolar. That is not the whole of who I am. That is not what makes me who I am. I have bipolar. It's a piece of the puzzle. But is it a piece that I would remove if I had the option? Probably not. It's taught me so much about resilience, about strength, about what I can go through and still come out the other side, about how I can support people, about what empathy really means. It has taught me so, so much. And it's something that I've chosen to utilize, to be able to make positive meaning out of, rather than letting it control my life or crumble my life down. Same with borderline personality disorder. Things that I refuse to let become the whole of who I am. I have had doctors tell me that with a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, I will never have a successful relationship. I got a husband somewhere around here. So take that, doctors. It doesn't mean that you are limited by the diagnoses and the labels that are put on you. I believe that labels can be extremely powerful when we take them back and we put them on ourselves. And they can be very dangerous when we put them on others, especially if we don't truly understand who that person is. So I take back those labels. I go to the pharmacy and I pick up my medication. And as the pharmacist rings me up, I look at the bill and I say, whoa, it's expensive being crazy. And she looks at me and she doesn't really know if she should laugh or not. And I tell her, it's okay, I laughed first. When I speak in schools, I often show up to an auditorium of 300 middle schoolers. I show up in heels, I show up in dress pants, I look, to all intents and purposes, like a grown-up. And I ask the kids, who thinks I look like a crazy person? And they really hesitate with that answer. And of course, you get a couple kids that'll say yes for a laugh, but nobody raises their hand. And then I explain to them that mental illness can look like anyone. It's not the unhoused man on the corner talking to himself. Yes, he may be experiencing mental health concerns, but that is not what it always looks like. It's not always somebody who's hospitalized. It's not always somebody who can't function in their life. Yes, there are people who experience these things, and they deserve support. They deserve a mental health care system that can support them better. But mental health and mental illness can look like anybody in this room. And I think it's important to remember that before we judge or we create shame. So I just want you to remember that language piece and that talking openly about it piece, that hopefully me being so transparent can inspire you to do the same and inspire you to start those conversations in the environments where you're comfortable doing so and not feeling shame for yourself either, not putting shame on other people either. It's a difficult conversation, especially when it comes to things like self-harm, suicide. We talk about it in hushed tones. We avoid those topics because we're afraid we might trigger someone. We're afraid we might put the idea in someone's head. But research has actually shown that talking about suicide directly and asking someone directly if they are thinking about it will reduce the chances of them going through with an attempt. So never be afraid to broach that topic with your friends, with your children, with your coworkers, with anybody in your life that you fear might be in a place where they're thinking about that. There are resources out there. And the more you talk about it, the more likely you are to save a life, and you might not even realize it. So we need to keep that in mind. The other piece that I think is really important is that recovery, as I mentioned, is not linear. It's not going to be a simple journey of finding a doctor, getting diagnosed, getting some treatment, feeling better. There are ups and downs. It's not a straight line upwards. It's more of a big, messy squiggle vaguely sauntering in a forward direction. And as long as you're still sauntering in that forward direction, then you're doing okay. And when you have setbacks and slip-ups and dips down into that dark place again, that doesn't mean you won't find your way out. Recovery is not easy, and it's different for everyone. It could be from a substance use disorder. It could be from a severe mental health diagnosis. It could be from something like anxiety or a feeling of overwhelm or depression that you maybe don't even have a diagnosis for. Does that make it any less valid? Not at all. You need to remember that you deserve support, you deserve help, and you deserve to talk about it as a health issue without feeling that shame and that judgment. So the thing with mental health recovery, with the mental health process that we're all in over the course of our lives and that we can support one another within, is that it won't be easy, but it will always be worth it. And it will even be more worth it, and it will be even more powerful if we can do it together. And that is part of what John was talking about, that worldview of community practices, coming together as human beings. There is an anecdote that was shared that has now been debunked, but the story is actually really lovely, so I still share it. An anthropology professor was asked, what was the first sign of civilization ever that was found? And people were talking about tools and jewelry and the advent of certain metals. And she said, nope, we found a skeleton with a healed femoral fracture. Now, if you don't know, your femur is the biggest bone in your body, and fracturing that can be extremely dangerous. The fact that a human being survived a femoral fracture and that it healed means that they had support. They had someone carrying them, feeding them, changing bandages, what have you. And that is a true sign of civilization, is people coming together to support one another. So that community piece and that lived experience piece where we share what we've been through to support and inspire others, that is something that I hope we can start seeing a change with within the mental health care system, so that that has more power and more space to have the impact that it can. So if I can leave you with anything, I'd like to encourage you to share what you go through to the level that you're comfortable, but you never know when you will make an impact on someone who then will share with someone else. And that might incite them to get the support that they deserve. That's why I share. That's why I've learned to be transparent and comfortable with everything that I've been through. And anybody who wants to call me a crazy person, that's okay by me, because I see that as a really beautiful thing.